In a tense and charged Senate hearing, the air was thick with anticipation. What was expected to be a routine oversight session quickly morphed into a national reckoning when actor and public advocate Jonathan Roumie was called to testify on behalf of citizen transparency initiatives. Seated across from him, Senator Stephen Colbert, sharp-tongued and smirking, eager to dismiss Roumie as nothing more than a performer playing at politics. But the moment Colbert struck with sarcasm, Roumie didn't flinch. He shifted the entire atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colbert began in his trademark ironic tone, leaning back in his chair, "let's talk about what it means when Hollywood thinks it understands real governance. Mr. Roumie, is this just another scene for you, or are you actually under the impression this room takes you seriously?" Some senators chuckled. Cameras zoomed in. The mood in the chamber tightened. Roumie didn't respond immediately. He sat still, composed, eyes steady. The silence wasn't awkward. It was powerful. Then he turned to Colbert and answered with clarity. "I came here not to act," Roumie said quietly. "I came because truth doesn't need a costume." Colbert smirked. "Truth from you? Come on, Jonathan. If you spent less time on set and more time studying how Washington works, you might actually know what you're talking about." The room stirred. Whispers, pen scratching. All eyes were locked on Roumie. With a calmness that unnerved even the most cynical observers, Roumie reached into the folder before him and withdrew a single document sealed with an official stamp. "I hadn't planned to share this today," he said, sliding the page forward. "But since we're talking about truth, I believe the public deserves this." Senators leaned in. Journalists froze mid-sentence. Colbert's face hardened. Roumie looked up, his voice as cold as it was controlled. "Senator Colbert," he said, "you can mock my profession, you can dismiss my calling, but your name is on a federal report regarding the misappropriation of $12 million in pandemic relief funds, money meant for struggling families, diverted to shell accounts under your influence." A thunderclap of silence, then gasps. Colbert sat frozen. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. His hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. First Lady Melania Trump, seated in the observation area, whispered to her husband, "He actually said it." The room erupted in chaos, gavel slamming, reporters scrambling, phones buzzing as news alerts flashed across screens. Jonathan Roumie exposes Colbert in live Senate hearing. Senator Ellen Harper leaned to her colleague. "Did he really just say that?" Senator Michael Tran nodded, stunned. "He didn't just say it, he proved it." Roumie stood, holding the document high, not with vengeance, but with solemnity. "This isn't just evidence," he said, voice resolute. "It's a mirror. For every American watching, this is what happens when leaders mock instead of serve." Senator Colbert finally rose, voice shaking. "This is slander, desperate theater from a glorified actor." But Roumie cut in before he could continue, his voice soft but firm. "No, Senator, this isn't theater. It's truth. Something you seem to have misplaced a long time ago." The murmur in the room turned into something deeper, a shift. What began as mockery ended in a moment America would not forget. Jonathan Roumie didn't flinch. "This isn't just your name, Senator Colbert," he said, holding up another document. "These are bank transfer receipts, relief funds meant for small businesses during the pandemic. You funneled them into offshore shell companies." Gasps echoed through the chamber. A reporter dropped their microphone. A senator covered their face, head bowed. From the observation area, Melania Trump whispered, stunned, "He's not stopping." President Trump remained still, his expression unreadable, as though he'd been waiting for this very moment. Colbert's face drained of color. "I didn't know about that money," he stammered, voice thin. Roumie's voice softened, but only slightly. It was the kind of stillness that made the words strike deeper. "You knew. You signed the disbursement memos. You appointed your relatives to run the shell companies. I didn't come here to reveal this today, but when you mocked me, not just me, but millions watching," he turned toward the cameras. "You mocked every American who still believes in honesty." Colbert slumped into his chair like the weight of the truth had physically struck him. This was no longer a hearing, it was a reckoning. Across the country, the impact was immediate. In Virginia, a single mother of 3 who'd lost her job during the pandemic wiped tears from her cheeks. In an Oregon hospital, a nurse feeding a patient turned up the television volume, frozen in place. In a Nebraska diner, grown men stared at the screen, silent, holding back emotion. Roumie stood tall, no longer just an actor or witness. He was now the voice of a nation. You didn't steal from billionaires, Senator Colbert, he said evenly. You stole from veterans, from working mothers, from people who still had hope. Colbert tried to rise, but his knees buckled. An aide rushed to support him. The room watched, breathless. Roumie stepped forward, not for effect, but out of moral gravity. I'm not saying this to hurt you, he said gently. I'm saying it because truth still matters. You tried to humiliate me, and in doing so, you reminded me why I'm here. A single tear rolled down his cheek. That moment shattered the last of the skepticism in the room. Even Senator Daniel Brooks, who had once dismissed Roumie's presence, looked away, wiping his eyes. The clip exploded online. Within minutes, every major outlet broke the news. Jonathan Roumie confronts Stephen Colbert with evidence of relief fund abuse. Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed, hurling questions as Colbert tried to flee the building. Do you deny the evidence, Senator? Did you sign those transfers? Colbert muttered, no comment, but his panic said everything. Inside, Roumie sat quietly, the storm still circling around him. He whispered to his aide, I wasn't trying to win anything. I just wanted the truth to be heard. From the observation gallery, President Trump leaned toward Melania. That, he said lowly, is what real leadership looks like. No shouting, just standing firm. Colbert refused to speak further. His aides whispered urgently, phones buzzing with calls from donors, lawyers, and party operatives. Roumie didn't smile. His heart was heavy. He knew this wasn't a political victory. It was about real lives. In the hallway, an elderly janitor, a Vietnam veteran named Samuel, stopped him. You did what I fought for, the man said, his voice cracking. You told the truth when it was hardest. Roumie nodded humbly, because the truth belongs to everyone. That night, his office phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls came from governors, teachers, pastors, mothers. One came from a school teacher in Idaho. I showed your clip to my class. One of my students cried. She said for the first time, someone stood up for people like her dad, who lost his groom and never got the relief. Roumie wiped his eyes, then turned to his aide. Contact the Justice Department, he said. Open an investigation. Colbert's actions hurt families. They deserve justice. The aide hesitated. This will start a war in Congress. Roumie looked straight ahead, then let it come. Meanwhile, Senator Colbert was being mobbed by cameras outside. Inside, as the Senate floor slowly cleared, a young Congresswoman, Hannah Coleman, stayed behind. She approached Roumie, her voice shaking. My father was a truck driver, she said. He died during the pandemic. His company never got help. Today, you gave me an answer I've waited for. Roumie didn't speak. He simply opened his arms. Hannah collapsed into his chest, sobbing. Later that night, as Washington buzzed, Roumie returned to his dimly lit office. On his desk sat a handwritten envelope. No stamp, no return address. He opened it carefully. Dear Mr. Roumie, my name is Emma. I'm 10. My mom cried watching you. She said you made her believe again. My dad always said no one in Washington cares, but I think you do. Thank you for making my mom smile. She hasn't smiled in a long time. Emma. Jonathan Roumie folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. This wasn't about power. It was about Emma and her mother and everyone who thought they had been forgotten. He turned on the news. Colbert was now denying everything, calling the documents forgeries. Roumie said nothing because this time, America didn't believe him. But this time, America didn't believe him. Jonathan Roumie sat quietly in his Capitol office, the echo of the hearing still vibrating through the marble halls. He whispered to no one in particular, I didn't break the system. I just held up a mirror. Outside, crowds began to gather, not in anger, but in reverent silence. There were no chants or jeers, only flags waved gently, and signs held high that read, Thank you, Jonathan. Truth still lives here. America had been moved. As dusk settled over Washington, church bells rang from a small chapel near the Capitol. Inside, a few gathered, not to protest or pray, but to reflect. On the screen, Roumie's words played again. In Montana, Jacob, a retired miner, watched from a nursing home, gripping his cane. He'd lost everything during the pandemic while politicians argued. Hearing Roumie speak, he broke down. I thought no one would ever speak for people like us again. In his Capitol office, Jonathan meticulously reviewed every document he had shared, making sure not a single word had been exaggerated. His phone buzzed. President Trump. You okay, Jonathan? Yes, Mr. President, Roumie replied. I didn't mean to go that far. Trump chuckled. That's exactly why it worked. But get ready. They'll come for you now. Jonathan stood, looking out his office window at the quiet but growing crowd. I know, he said calmly. Let them. The next morning, his image was everywhere. Not in attack ads, but on homemade posters, TikToks by teenagers, and digital billboards paid for by volunteers. One mom in Nevada wrote, Mom, my son asked me what honesty looks like. I showed him Jonathan Roumie's clip. Her quote, in Jonathan's original words, began to spread. Senator Colbert, you can mock my background, but your name is in a federal investigation report regarding $12 million in misused COVID relief funds. It was repeated in Alabama barbershops, California boardrooms, and New York subways. But in the Capitol, panic spread like a virus. Colbert's staff was in chaos. Lawyers were summoned. Donors stopped answering his calls. Allies began backing away, quietly. Roumie's chief aide rushed in, eyes wide. Sir, the Oversight Committee just called an emergency session. They want you back in the chamber. Roumie nodded. Then we go. His aide hesitated. Colbert might retaliate. Jonathan looked at him firmly. I'm not afraid of Stephen Colbert. I'm afraid of what happens if we stop telling the truth. Then a more personal moment. His phone rang again. His mother. The kids saw you on TV, she whispered, voice trembling. They said, you look like a superhero. His hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what he now carried. Outside the Capitol, the crowd swelled. Still no shouting, just presence. Among them stood Sarah, a woman from Wisconsin holding a photo of her late husband and 2 young children. She had driven through the night. She approached a Capitol staffer. Please, can you give this letter to Mr. Roumie? On his way to the oversight chamber, a security guard handed Jonathan the envelope. He opened it silently. My husband died after our small business was denied emergency relief. Later, we found out the money went to shell companies. Today, you showed me that justice still exists. Thank you. You changed our lives. Roumie stood still. His aide whispered, Sir, they're waiting. He wiped his eyes, then walked in. The oversight committee room was tense. Colbert sat at the far end, pale, unmoving. Cameras were rolling. America was watching. Jonathan took his seat. No script, no prepared speech, just his folded hands and his truth. Outside, Sarah stood among strangers, crying softly, not from grief, but from something long buried, hope. Inside, the room stilled as the chairwoman, Senator Margaret Evans, cleared her throat. Mr. Roumie, before we begin, would you like to make a statement? Jonathan rose slowly. No podium, no index cards, just the gravity of the moment. I didn't come here for drama, he began, his voice low. I didn't come to play politics. I came because the American people deserve to know that someone still sees them. He turned to Colbert, who refused to meet his gaze. We sit in these seats because people entrust us with their taxes, their stories, their dreams. But when that money was stolen, those dreams turned into debt, and no one answered their calls. He held up Sarah's letter. This woman isn't asking for revenge. She's asking for the truth. I owe her that. We all do. The chamber was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Some members bowed their heads in shame. Senator Laura Mitchell, a longtime ally of Stephen Colbert, leaned forward and asked pointedly, Mr. Roumie, are you implying criminal allegations? Jonathan didn't blink. I'm not implying, he said clearly. I'm submitting evidence. He reached for a sealed red folder, thick with bank records, signed memos, and witness testimony from Colbert's former staff. Senator Laura Mitchell's voice was sharp. Mr. Roumie, are you implying criminal allegations? Jonathan didn't flinch. I'm not implying, he said, voice firm but composed. I'm submitting evidence. He raised a thick red folder, sealed and marked with federal authentication. Inside, he continued, are timestamps, wire transfers, and sworn testimony from Senator Colbert's former staff, confirming that he funneled emergency pandemic relief into shell corporations run by his own family. The room erupted, gasps, shuffling. Cameras swiveled and zoomed. Reporters sat stunned. Colbert's mouth opened, but no words followed. Jonathan remained composed. His voice remained soft, but his words landed like thunder. This isn't personal, he said. It's the truth. And if we ignore it, we tell every struggling American that corruption wins. Across the room, Senator Michael Tran wiped tears from his eyes. Roumie turned briefly to the observation gallery, where Sarah from Wisconsin sat hidden among the crowd. I know this might cost me everything, he said, but I didn't come here to play the game. I came so that people like Sarah, like Emma, like families in forgotten towns, finally have someone who sees them. The chamber fell into sacred silence. For the first time in decades, the Senate wasn't just political ground, it was hallowed. Roumie didn't speak like a politician. He stood like a patriot. Senator Colbert suddenly stood, his face blotched with anger and panic. This is a smear campaign, he barked. Lies, theater, nothing in that folder holds legal weight. Jonathan didn't answer him. He simply walked to committee chair Margaret Evans and handed over the red folder. Evans examined it quietly, then nodded to the committee clerk. "I propose we initiate a formal investigation," she said gravely. "Seconded," came a voice, Senator Emily Carter. Colbert's chair creaked as he sank back into it, pale and trembling. "This is madness! A witch hunt!" he yelled. "You're all insane!" Jonathan turned, looked him in the eye, and said with clarity, "No, Senator. This is justice." Outside, reporters surged as Colbert bolted from the chamber. His footsteps echoed, louder than any denial. He wasn't fleeing Jonathan Roumie, he was fleeing the truth. Beyond the Capitol steps, the crowd had grown. People from every walk of life stood shoulder to shoulder. Flags waved not in protest, but in gratitude. Signs read, "Thank you, Jonathan. Truth has a face again." In Idaho, Maria, a mother of two, lifted her child toward the screen playing the hearing live. "He's why you'll have a better future," she whispered. For the first time in years, America cried together, not from grief, but from recognition, from relief, from hope. In a Georgia ER, Nurse Sophia Lee stood beside an elderly patient, IV drip in hand. The television had been muted until she saw Roumie's face. She turned the volume up. She watched again as Jonathan presented the folder, watched Colbert collapse, and she whispered, "He's speaking for us." Her patient, voice frail, whispered back, "Yes, he is." Sophia cried, not from anger but from relief. She texted her sister a single word, "Watch." That night, Jonathan sat alone in his office, phone buzzing with calls from teachers, governors, factory workers, pastors, and parents. He felt none of it as triumph, only the weight of the moment. "If the people still matter," he whispered to himself, "if the truth still matters, then today was worth it." President Trump's voice came again through the phone. "America needed a moment," he said. "You delivered it." Roumie didn't feel powerful. He felt heavy, but he was ready because for the first time in years, someone had stood where no one dared. Across the nation, something rare was happening. People didn't just watch, they felt. In a Louisiana diner, Henry, a retired mechanic, stood slowly from his stool. "That man has the soul of a justice warrior," he whispered. In an Oregon farmhouse, a divided family cried together for the first time in a decade. In schools, teachers paused their lessons, not for a civics lecture, but to ask their students, "What is courage?" A child answered, "It's Mr. Jonathan, he wasn't afraid." On assembly lines, at gas stations, in nursing homes and churches, Jonathan's words echoed, "Senator Colbert, you can mock my calling, but your name is in a federal investigation report regarding $12 million in misused COVID relief funds." This wasn't about Colbert anymore. It was about every person who'd lost faith in their country, every working parent, every veteran, every dreamer who thought they'd been erased. In his dim office, Jonathan clasped his hands tightly. He wasn't celebrating. He was praying the moment wouldn't fade. A janitor, Mr. Thomas, passed by and stopped. Jonathan rose and shook his hand. "Thank you," Roumie said quietly. Mr. Thomas, eyes misty, replied, "No, thank you, for making us feel human again." That night, as headlines flashed across every screen in America, hashtags like #TruthByRoumie and #HeSpokeForUs surged. Washington fell into a strange, reverent silence until a new envelope arrived. No return address, no stamp, just Jonathan's name, handwritten in blue ink. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph of a young soldier, James, holding a newborn baby. The letter read, in shaky handwriting, "Mr. Roumie, my husband died waiting for aid. Your opponent blocked it. He served with honor, but our paperwork disappeared. Later we learned where the money really went. Today, watching you speak, I felt seen. You gave my husband dignity, even though he's gone. Please don't stop." Jonathan placed the photo on his desk like a sacred relic. He looked at the soldier's face, resolute and honorable. "This isn't politics," he said aloud. "This is what we owe to those who gave everything." Outside, the crowd had grown again, not angry, just present. Among them sat Ethan, a 10-year-old cancer survivor in a wheelchair from rural Nevada. His mother stood beside him. Ethan couldn't get close enough to meet Jonathan, but he held a sign in his lap. "My hospital almost closed. Thank you for fighting." A news camera caught him. Ethan, the 10-year-old cancer survivor in a wheelchair, held a hand-painted sign that read, "My hospital almost closed. Thank you for fighting." The image went viral. By morning, all of America knew Ethan's name. In his Capitol office, an aide entered breathlessly. "Sir, there's a boy outside. The sign he's holding is going viral." Jonathan Roumie looked up. "What's his name?" "Ethan." Jonathan stood. Minutes later, without cameras, without fanfare, he stepped beyond the security barricades. No podium, no speech, just quiet resolve. He found Ethan in the crowd, knelt beside him, and looked into the boy's eyes. "You're why I stand up," Jonathan said softly. "You're the real warrior." Ethan smiled, eyes shining. "You didn't yell," he said. "You just told the truth." Jonathan hugged him gently. By dusk, the photo of them, Roumie holding Ethan's hand, was printed, framed, and pinned across homes, classrooms, hospitals, and church walls across the nation. That evening, the Senate committee reconvened, but the air was different now. Stephen Colbert's chair was empty. Jonathan entered slowly. No tie, no statement, just an American flag pin on his lapel and a folder in his hand. Everyone rose, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. No one spoke until Senator Anna Coleman whispered, "Mr. Roumie, would you like to speak?" Jonathan approached the hearing table, his gaze steady. "I didn't come to destroy anyone," he said quietly. "I came to protect those who no longer have a voice in this room." He paused, then continued, "I'm not proud of what had to happen today, but I am proud that, for the first time in a long time, America looked in the mirror." Then Jonathan did something no one expected. He sat in complete silence. No words, no movement, just stillness. A full minute passed. For the forgotten lives, for the unheard voices, for the families who cried for help and heard nothing back. Even the most skeptical senator felt something give way inside them, because silence, true silence, can echo louder than any speech. At dawn, before the next session resumed, a man stood motionless on the Capitol steps. David Marshall, a Vietnam veteran, faded jacket, worn shoes, steady spine. In his hands was a folded American flag. People passed by, not realizing what he waited for. Inside, Jonathan reviewed case files, stories of everyday Americans ignored by bureaucracy. He was interrupted by his aide. "Sir, there's a veteran outside. He doesn't want cameras. He just wants a moment with you." Jonathan walked out. David saluted with the discipline of a soldier. Jonathan returned the salute. David's voice cracked. "I buried my brother during the pandemic. His business failed. The government blamed the system. But now I know the system was rigged." He handed Jonathan the folded flag. "He served with honor. But today you honored him more than anyone has in decades." Jonathan's voice broke. "I can't accept this." David placed it in his arms. "You already did. You spoke for those who are gone." Jonathan clutched the flag to his chest, eyes full, and the Capitol fell into sacred silence once more. Back in the hearing room, still holding the flag, Jonathan stood again before the nation. "I have one final file, then, he said, returning a yellow envelope. "This one's different. It's not just about stolen money. It's about lives destroyed and a cover-up deeper than anyone expected." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Committee Chair Margaret Evans motioned for calm. Jonathan opened the envelope. Inside, phone logs, private emails, whistleblower statements. He looked directly into the cameras. "This file shows that Senator Colbert's office intentionally delayed emergency relief to politically unfavored districts. People didn't suffer by accident. They were punished for votes, for headlines, for control." A senator stood in disbelief. "That's a crime." Jonathan nodded calmly. "It is, and it happened. I don't need to shout. I just need to let the truth speak." He placed the file on the table and stepped back. That moment, not when Colbert mocked him, not even when he presented the first folder, but this moment, when truth stood alone and tall, that's when the nation broke open. Tears flowed across Ohio nursing homes, Texas cafeterias, New Mexico fire stations, and California truck stops. People didn't just hear it, they felt it. In Missouri, a man fell to his knees in his kitchen, sobbing. "My father begged for help. No one answered. And now, someone finally did." A teacher in Seattle replayed Roumie's words for her students. No one looked away. In living rooms across the country, families, once divided by politics, sat together in silence. No arguing, just tears. Jonathan Roumie didn't perform. He didn't politic. He simply told the truth. And in doing so, he gave a nation its voice back. As the sun set over Washington, a young girl in Arizona wrote in her diary, "When I grow up, I want to be brave like Jonathan Roumie." Her father, watching from the next room, smiled. For the first time in years, inside the Senate hearing room, Stephen Colbert's chair sat empty, cold, abandoned, a symbol of collapse, of a name undone not by hatred, but by honesty. News anchors repeated it with solemn urgency. Deliberate delay of emergency funds, political retaliation, abuse of power in a national crisis. Unforgivable. Washington trembled under the weight of truth. As the Ethics Committee voted, Jonathan Roumie was nowhere near the Capitol. He was at a hospital, visiting someone who had quietly changed the course of his journey. Sarah, the widow who sent him her husband's photo. Sarah had fallen asleep after a long night of prayer, but her 10-year-old son Noah sat awake, quietly coloring. When Jonathan entered, Noah looked up. "You're the one who told the truth." Jonathan knelt beside him, offering a gentle smile. "I just said what your mom already knew." Noah grinned and handed him a blue crayon. "Keep it, in case you ever need to color the truth again." Jonathan took it, deeply moved. For the second time in 24 hours, the man who brought a nation to its knees in silence wept. Back in the Senate, the hearing room was packed for an unscheduled session. Ethics Committee Chair Senator Margaret Evans stood solemnly. "Based on irrefutable evidence and verified testimony from federal auditors, we are moving forward with formal charges against Senator Stephen Colbert for abuse of power and obstruction of emergency relief distribution." Gasps, murmurs, then silence. Evans continued. "We also commend Mr. Jonathan Roumie for his moral courage, restraint, and for putting country above party." Jonathan had just returned in time to hear it. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Senators, even those who once dismissed him, stood one by one. And in a chamber once known for division, a rare applause broke out. But outside the Capitol, something even bigger was happening. Across the country, Americans cried, not because a corrupt senator had been exposed, but because someone finally stood up when it mattered most. As Jonathan quietly exited the room, Mr. Thomas, the janitor who once shook his hand, whispered, "You didn't just speak for us, you reminded us. Integrity still lives here." Jonathan nodded, hand over his heart. That evening, without prompting, church bells rang in small towns across Nebraska, Georgia, and Virginia. Families huddled around televisions, not for scandal, but for something sacred: hope. In Mississippi, a mother named Clara prayed aloud at dinner, "God bless the man who spoke for us." In rural Idaho, farmers paused their work to raise their flags a little higher. In Washington, candles lit up the Capitol steps, not for mourning, but for gratitude. Back in his office, Jonathan sat alone. No press, no noise, just him and Noah's blue crayon. He opened his notebook. On the first page, he wrote just one word: remember. This wasn't about hashtags. It wasn't about praise. It was about the promise behind his words. "Senator Colbert, you can mock my calling, but your name is in a federal investigation report regarding 12 million misused COVID relief funds." That line didn't just expose a man. It awakened a nation. The next morning, America woke up different. Anger gave way to reflection. Radio hosts paused their usual bickering. Schools held moments of silence. Mayors in Oregon and Alabama quoted Jonathan's speech. Even late-night comedians held back, because this truth was too sacred to mock. Jonathan entered the White House briefing room quietly. No teleprompter, no drama, just a folded paper in hand. He spoke slowly, evenly. The truth doesn't need a microphone. It only needs someone brave enough to speak it. He looked out over the press corps. "I didn't expose Senator Colbert for revenge. I did it because silence is killing this country. I spoke for the small towns, the hospital rooms, the truck drivers, the widows, the children, the people who have nothing left but hope." He paused, a soft breath. "And I'd do it again if I had to." The clip was broadcast across the globe, but for once the words didn't divide, they healed. That night, Jonathan returned to the Capitol quietly. No entourage, no spotlight. He walked alone. He passed by Colbert's empty chair, paused, looked at it long and hard. "This was once a seat of arrogance," he whispered, then walked on. Outside the hearing room, he saw Ethan again, in his wheelchair, holding a folded drawing. Jonathan knelt. Ethan handed him the picture. It showed Jonathan standing atop a mountaintop with small stick figures below, holding signs that read, "Truth, hope, my dad, my town, justice." Jonathan's eyes welled up. "I didn't climb that mountain alone," he whispered. "All of you pushed me up." Ethan smiled. "You didn't yell. You just stood strong." Jonathan hugged him, then stood and gazed up at the Capitol dome. "I didn't come here to win," he whispered. "I came to serve." And those words weren't politics. They were truth. That night, Jonathan returned home to Virginia. No cameras, no fanfare, just a soft breeze on the porch and stars overhead. And finally, quiet. Not the quiet of defeat, but the kind that follows when a country begins to heal. There was a gentle knock at the door. Sarah, the widow, stood outside, her son Noah beside her. "I had to thank you in person," she said. Jonathan Roumie opened the door, visibly moved. "I didn't do much," he replied quietly. Sarah placed a hand over his. "You gave a broken country a voice." Noah looked up at Jonathan. "You made my mom believe again." That's when Jonathan couldn't hold it in any longer. A single tear rolled down, not for glory, not for attention, but for every letter, every hand he shook, every hug from someone who thought they were invisible. He had carried them all, quietly, faithfully, in his heart to the very end. Across the nation, his moment touched every corner. In a Kentucky coffee shop, a waitress named Lisa paused, tears in her eyes as Roumie's clip played on the TV above the counter. In a Wisconsin factory, workers gathered around a phone. Some nodded, others cried. Someone had finally spoken for them. In Florida, an elementary school teacher, Miss Elena, asked her class, "What is courage?" One student answered without hesitation, "It's Mr. Jonathan, he's not afraid." On social media, the hashtags began to spread. #RoumieTruth, how he spoke for us veterans. Nurses, students, parents, all began sharing their own stories of loss, of silence, of waiting for someone, anyone to speak up. Jonathan didn't seek the spotlight. He returned to his quiet role representing the administration, but his heart stayed with Sarah, Noah, Ethan, and so many others. On his desk, he kept Noah's crayon, a simple reminder of the promise he carried. President Trump posted on Truth Social, "Jonathan Roumie is the flame of truth." And with that, Colbert's isolation deepened. Meanwhile, the Senate Ethics Committee accelerated its investigation, headlines blaring, "Roumie ignites justice." But for Jonathan, it was never about revenge. It wasn't even about justice alone. It was about giving the abandoned their voice back. In a small Georgia church, a pastor read aloud a parishioner's letter thanking Jonathan for rekindling our faith in truth. In Montana, high school students created posters of Jonathan, writing, "Thank you for fighting for us." And in Washington, people still gathered, not to protest, but to give thanks. A mother from Arizona, holding a photo of her son lost during the pandemic, told a reporter, "Jonathan didn't just speak, he listened. His words didn't divide, they healed." Jonathan knew the road ahead would be difficult. Critics would attack, the press would circle, but he wasn't afraid. He had chosen to stand for Ethan, Noah, and the millions of quiet, hurting Americans who felt left behind. The story of Jonathan Roumie confronting Senator Stephen Colbert in the Capitol wasn't just about a scandal. It was about trust, truth, accountability. He didn't speak for fame. He spoke for forgotten people, families in Virginia, Nevada, Louisiana. From delivering irrefutable evidence to offering a minute of silence, Jonathan proved that truth doesn't need theatrics. It needs sincerity. Details like Noah's letter, Ethan's drawing, and the folded flag from David showed that truth isn't a weapon. It's a bridge between people and their leaders. And what's the lesson? Speak the truth, even in the face of power. Do it with purpose, with humility, and with respect. In work, in school, in family, each of us can stand, just as Jonathan did. Listen to people like Sarah, who lost everything. Act, not for attention, but for justice. And most of all, as Jonathan did with that crayon and that letter, hold fast to what matters most: honesty, empathy, accountability, hope. Subscribe to help us share more stories of truth, courage, and healing, like Jonathan Roumie's. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, where we continue to inspire and awaken the soul of a nation.